This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is about a guy named Jake Doss and his life and demise in Artesia, Mississippi, in the Black Belt Prairie here near Columbus. He died in March of 1885. Jake Doss was an African-American man living in the Black Belt Prairie about 6 miles from Artesia, Mississippi. Doss and his wife Ann were listed as sharing a household with their 3 children in the Lowndes County 1880 census. Doss is listed as being roughly 27 years old and had 3 children living at home with him and his wife, Ann. The children were named Estelle, Lou, and Susan. At the time of March 1885, he had recently separated from his wife, Ann, and Doss was known in the community as a man who had a dark and checkered past. In 1883 or 1884, Doss was alleged to have killed a local woman for an unknown reason. Quote, Jake Doss was well known as a bad, vicious, dangerous Negro. He had previously to the murder of his wife last Friday committed a murder crimes, including the killing of a woman last year. End quote. Judge Lynch, Vicksburg Evening Post, dated 16 March 1885. By late 1884, early 1885, Doss, separated from his wife, had asked her for a divorce in order to marry his paramour, who lived in Starkville, Mississippi. His wife refused to agree to a divorce, so Doss became impatient and plotted to take his bachelorhood back. He tricked his wife into thinking he wanted to reconcile with her and moved back into their home. A few days later, he claimed to have plans to buy a horse from a man across the bridge near Artesia and asked her to go with him to look at the steed. As they returned home across the bridge, Doss hit her on the head with a club, fracturing her skull. She fell off their wagon and sank into the deep creek below. Freed of his wife, Doss took off to find his girlfriend, and 48 hours later they were married and set up house in Starkville. Ann's family and friends grew suspicious that she had not returned home to her children, and Doss was gone, and rumors of his new marriage were rapidly circulating. People reported seeing him go to Artesia with his wife across the bridge, but never saw her with him after he crossed the bridge on the return home. Neighbors went to look for his wife, Ann, and her body was found in the creek, weighted down by rope tied around railroad iron. Quoted from the Weekly Democrat, 18 March 1885, a warrant was sworn out charging Doss with murder, and he was arrested in Starkville and brought back to Artesia for preliminary examination. A Mississippi murderer swung into eternity by men of his own race. The Vicksburg Herald, 24 March 1885. A warrant was taken out for Jake Doss's capture, and he was arrested in Starkville and returned to Artesia by local deputy Walter Lucas via the morning train, according to the Weekly Democrat, 18 March 1885. Doss was brought over before Justice Cook that same day and was bound over on a $2,500 bond for transfer to the county seat. Doss was put in a locked upper room of a store — the town had no separate jail in Artesia at that time — to await removal to Columbus to the courthouse the next morning. Later that same evening, between 200 and 300, and some reports claim 300 to 400, black and white masked men from the community gathered in Artesia. A dozen of the men quietly entered the store and went up the stairs, where Doss was confined with 2 armed guards. The delegation of men took Doss from the room after promising not to harm the guards if they stepped aside. The guards were easily overpowered by the dozen or so men and relinquished the prisoner, per the Weekly Democrat, 18 March 1885. The crowd then marched Doss to the M&O Railroad trestle a few hundred yards away from the store. On top of the bridge, the spokesman for the group asked Doss where his wife was. Not knowing that his wife's body had already been found, Doss responded, "I gave a man $25 to take her. I don't know where she is." Someone in the crowd shouted, "We found her." Doss knew he'd been found out and apparently showed no fear. As the leaders of the mob brought Doss to the edge of the trestle bridge, an older man in the crowd knelt and began to pray for Doss's soul in a long-winded prayer. Several papers used dialect to establish a racially dismissive tone about the prayer by the preacher at the site of Doss's death. Quote, arriving at the appointed spot, an old Negro in the crowd knelt down and offered up a prayer for the po misfortunate brooder about to evacuate this earth. He was elegant and too long-winded. A model morning, the Huntsville Independent, 26 March, 1885. The mob, growing impatient with the adjunct professor's 30-minute prayer that appeared to be droning on possibly longer, was cut off by one of the leaders of the mob. A rope was brought to the front of the crowd, and his would-be executioner tied one end to the trestle. The executioner struggled to fashion the end of the rope into a batch of knots roughly resembling a noose. Impatient, Doss told the man, I don't want to be at my own hanging all night. Give me that. Per the Huntsville Independent, 26 March, 1885. Doss took the rope out of the man's hands and tied the noose, so it was snug to the left side of his neck. Doss had his hands then tied behind his back, and he was brought to the trestle's edge. He was pushed over the side to his impending death. Unfortunately, he landed in the soft soil and sand below unhurt. The rope was too long. Doss was hauled back up to the top of the trestle. The rope was shortened by several feet, and he was dropped over the side again. Doss's, quote, neck popped like a dried stick, end quote. The Huntsville Independent, 26 March, 1885. The crowd quickly dissipated, leaving him hanging there until morning. The coroner was called, and his inquest reported Doss's death was due to hanging by person or persons unknown. Doss's death was covered far and wide. The Watertown News of Wisconsin, the St. Louis Globe of Missouri, the Buffalo Commercial in New York, the New York Times, and the Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported the story, as did the San Francisco Examiner, the Eaton Democrat, and the Evening Tribune from Kansas. The Southern papers communicated the same sentiments so common in the post-Civil War era. The most common close found in Alabama and Mississippi papers is demonstrated by the 24 March 1885 Vicksburg Herald reporting on the lynching. Quote, the summary vengeance, while deplored by the law-abiding citizens of Artesia, is regarded as nothing more than just, for the crime which Doss was found guilty of having committed was one of the most diabolical that has ever come to light in this country. End quote. A Mississippi murderer swung in eternity by men of his own race, the Vicksburg Herald. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast, The Tom Bigby Tales. Until next time.